Hello, welcome to another episode of Self-Wired. Self-Wired is a platform for self-education in the form of psychology, philosophy, and personal growth. Today I'll be going over David Eagleman's book, Livewired. Livewired dives deep into the latest findings in neuroplasticity and the way in which technology coincides with the brain's ability to compute data and make sense of new forms of information in order to adapt to its environment. Neuroplasticity is a fairly new subfield of psychology. It's something that has interested me for a while, and it's a fairly hard thing to approach because of the various facets that go into it. There's, the chemicals, the neurotransmitters, the different hormones, the different regions of the brain, how they communicate to one another, and the way they change over time, whether that be from injury or the influx of new information. So let's dive into this. David Eagleman is a fascinating person. He was a scientific advisor on the show New World. He is a neuroscientist with over 100 publications and several books for the layman, some of which are New York Times bestsellers. And he's also the inventor of some pretty strange technology that has opened up new possibilities for the hearing or the sight impaired individual, as well as just the everyday person interested in the idea of gaining a new sense, which is a pretty strange idea that we could go beyond what Mother Nature has equipped us with. We have eyes, nose, taste buds, everything else, but what if we were able to tap into more of objective reality? What if we could see the things a bat sees or smell the things a dog sees? These are questions that a while ago would have sounded completely absurd in the realm of science fiction. But what David Eagleman is showing us in this book is that these are on the horizon in the coming decades. So the idea of liveware, liveware comes from the term software and hardware in terms of, say, a computer. A computer comes equipped with complex circuitry like you see here, as well as software that can be updated and shifted via new changes that the developer brings out. We can download this stuff using the hardware that our computer comes equipped with. However, the brain is something trickier. It's not quite that we come equipped with a brain that is set in its way and can have updates. It's something more complicated. That's when we get into the realm of neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the way in which our brain molds itself to the environment that it finds itself in. So what we're seeing is information literally becomes a part of the brain. The brain changes as it integrates new information, and when it becomes injured, it has a strange capacity in a lot of cases to heal itself. And when it heals itself, healing itself comes in the form of shifting circuits around, which is something that we don't see in a piece of technology like a laptop. If you remove one piece of the hardware in a laptop, there's a ripple effect, and other aspects of the laptop stop working, or the whole thing shuts off completely in most cases. However, the brain has a unique capacity to adapt to injury or adapt to a changing environment. So on this slide, what we're looking at are neurons in normal environments, enriched environments, or in a deprived environment. And this, when I came across this, it was a huge stimulus for starting the channel, because as David Eagleman says, you become the information that you digest. So there's a physical change when you put yourself in the position of being intellectually enriched. You can visually see the change in your brain as you become smarter. So we see dendrites branching off of this neuron, and each of those dendrites represents the possibility for new neural pathways to become connected. There's a term used in neuroscience, well, in neuroplasticity, that neurons that fire together wire together. And as we go on in these slides, we'll come to understand that term in its depth, and understand that the way we spend our time, the information we digest, and the environment that we find ourselves in physically changes who we are as an individual person. So let's get into it. Here we have some pictures of the brain. And these pictures give us a good look into the way in which our brain changes. So we see in this drawing the difference between, say, a pianist and a violinist. So obviously, if you're going to become a great musician, you have to put in countless hours of repetition into mastering the skill. And what we're seeing is once you get into the realm of thousands of hours of practice, the brain has these little, I guess you could call them like hitches. There's a little clinch in the flesh of the brain. David Eagleman gave an example of a story in which a famous violinist, I don't know who the guy was, but what he would put in 4 hours in the morning, and then he would go and practice with a band, and then 4 hours at night. And someone came up to him and went, "I would give my life to play like you." And the violinist said, "I did." So it's an example of devoting yourself wholeheartedly to one endeavor and seeing the way in which your brain takes hold of that endeavor and molds itself to become the best possible form to help you be an expert in that field. And one thing that really stuck out to me on this subject was the idea that professionals actually devote less energy to performing a task. So if you look at David Eagleman gave the example of a professional soccer player. So you look at a professional soccer player, they're doing amazing things. They're making maneuvers across the field that illustrate the sheer volume of practice that they've put into mastering the ability to move that ball with their foot. And then you look at someone who's, a newbie, they just started soccer, and they have to put a lot of effort into even the simplest form of dribbling that soccer ball. So you look at them and you go, surely that professional is giving more energy. Surely because they're doing more complex maneuvers, there's more energy and there's more neurons firing in their brain than the newbie who's doing less. When in reality, the professional is actually devoting less energy into that skill, because the neural pathways are carved. it gets to the point where that soccer player is doing this stuff unconsciously. He's almost running on autopilot because there's so much time already invested in the development of that skill that he no longer has to pay as much close attention in order to perform. All right, so the other picture is a picture of a hemispherectomy. And some of you may know what this is. I hadn't heard of a hemispherectomy until I read the book, actually. So in certain cases, like in the case of severe seizures, individuals have to have an entire hemisphere removed from their brain, a whole half cut out, thrown out. And so, I mean, intuitively, you would think, okay, you remove a whole half of the brain, the person's a vegetable. There's no way that an individual can survive with half of an organ, the most important organ in terms of functioning, just removed, thrown out. But what we see is that when this happens and the individual is under the age of 7 or 8, they're able to lead a normal life outside of maybe a limp or issues using one of their hands in a lot of cases. So what's going on here? How come you can take a chunk out of someone's brain and have them be fine? You couldn't do that with my laptop. Remove half of my laptop and see how well I'm able to upload this video to YouTube. It won't happen. What happens to the brain, however, is somehow the brain gets the memo that half of its geography has been removed and rewires itself in order to put everything that used to be in both sides on one side. Mind-blowing stuff. I mean, both eyes work, both ears work. There's no impact on memory. There's very little impact on the individual's ability to move around in a lot of cases. I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but either way, the person doesn't die. That's amazing in and of itself. So a huge aspect of the brain is the way in which it has the capacity to get information to itself from the external environment. David Eagleman talks about how the brain is locked away in darkness and it has to figure out what's outside of this cave of our skull. The way in which it does it, obviously, is its sense organs. It's touch, eyes, taste. They're all wiring to our brain, and our brain is making sense of the data that comes in. So obviously, each one of these senses is incredibly important to the brain in order to allow it to understand what's going outside. Again, it's locked away in darkness. It can't make sense of what's going on in the external environment without these sensors that are going out and taking information. So what happens? Well, when blind people go blind, or even if they're born blind, the occipital cortex, the area of the brain that your eyes are hooked up to, the area of the brain that computes visual data, these areas of the brain get taken over by other sense organs. So we have a huge understanding. Well, anyone who looks into neuroscience has an understanding of neurons kind of working together, forming connections, kind of a cooperative endeavor in order to allow the brain to work at full capacity. David Eagleman proposes maybe they're fighting for territory. They're going to war and they're trying their best to mark out their spot on the map, the brain, and not allow any of these other neuron connections or these other parts of the brain that are designated to different tasks to use up their real estate. They want that for themselves. So what happens is a person goes blind. No more data going to the occipital cortex from the eyes. So what happens? Well, the occipital cortex becomes taken over by other sense organs or even by other tasks. So he mentioned a study where they tested blind people's memory capacity. So they gave them a long list of words, and they found that blind people on average are able to recall more words than the average person with sight. And I'm sure a lot of us have heard of people who are blind having incredible hearing, almost superhuman hearing. Well, some of them are able to echolocate, something that, I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't devote much time in the endeavor of echolocating. It's not something that I really need to do. So I don't have that capacity. But when we look at blind people, there's thousands of blind people that can go around clicking their tongue in order to navigate through their environment. So that's fairly amazing. There's this chunk of the brain that was originally devoted solely to visual information. No more visual information. So the brain reallocates that space in order to allow the brain to use new sets of information and adapt. So piggybacking off that last slide, when we look at someone who has lost the ability to use their eyes to read, and as amazing and resilient as humans are, they learn the capacity to read with their tip of their finger. How is this happening? Well, their touch receptors on their fingertip are being used in order to see, essentially. And what we see when we look into their brain is that information is going to the occipital cortex, the same region that their eyes would be using. David Eagleman explains this phenomena using a model that he calls the pH hypothesis, the potato head hypothesis. And essentially what he means by this is that this sensory technology that Mother Nature has equipped us with are essentially plug and play devices. We can switch them around. We can plug new ones in, as we'll see later, and we can change the location of them. You know, you can use your finger to see, you can use your tongue to hear your environment as opposed to seeing your environment. And as we get into this technology, we begin to understand that essentially no matter what kind of information you get into your brain figures out how to use it to help you navigate the complex world. So what we're looking at is a cochlear implant. And for those of you that don't know, a hearing aid is a device for amplification. So someone who has an ear that works but doesn't have the capacity to hear well, the hearing aid amplifies the noise so the working ear can hear it better. However, in people with more severe forms of hearing loss, they don't have this luxury. You can't just make the sound louder and allow them to hear. The ear is an incredibly complicated form of technology, and the whole thing has to be working for it to work appropriately. So a cochlear implant is a fairly new form of technology that involves placing electrodes in the cochlea. So these electrodes are connected to a wire, which is connected to a microphone. This microphone takes data from the external world in the form of wavelengths or sound vibrations in the air. and it transforms those sound waves into electrodes that stimulate the cochlea. Once this cochlea is stimulated, neurons fire and the brain goes, oh, okay, this area is being stimulated, and it can take that stimulation and extract information from it. However, like I mentioned, this isn't a mere amplification. This isn't, just a super loud form of information from wavelengths in the air. If one of us had this in, we wouldn't hear louder or from farther away. What we would hear is just zaps. We wouldn't hear language. We wouldn't hear, the same knocking that we hear with our own ears. This is a completely different form of sound, right? So it takes a long time for someone with one of these cochlear implants to learn the new form of sound. It's like a completely different language, except instead of just different sounds, different vernacular, it's completely different flavor of sound in general. It's a new form of information. And the brain has to learn what to do with this information. Another example is in someone who is blind. This blew me away when I saw it. So these sunglasses have a camera connected, as you see from the diagram. And so this camera takes information from the external environment, and it is plugged into a wire. At the end of this wire is a little pad, and on this pad are electrodes, little things to stimulate and vibrate. And it can be placed on the tongue, as in this example, on the forehead, on the chest, really anywhere. But depending on where the camera is pointed, different shapes of vibration are transmitted to this pad. And the person using this example with it connected to their tongue can feel what the camera is looking at. And again, in the same way that a blind person is able to read Braille and have that information plugged into their occipital cortex, the information from their tongue goes to the same area of the brain. This is David Eagleman's vest that he made. It's a very nice vest with a similar technology as we saw earlier. So this technology transmits sound waves into vibration, and as opposed to plugging that information into the cochlea, it just plugs it into your sense, your biggest sense organ, your skin. And so you feel the environment. And he had a really heartwarming story of a deaf person who, for 4 days, spent 2 hours a day using this vest, right? And so they took from a series of like 30 words, and they practiced with these 30 words. Well, on the 5th day, the person was able to cover their mouth, say the word touch, and the person was able to feel what the word touch felt like in vibrations on their chest and write that out on a whiteboard. So they were able to, I guess you could say, speak the language of vibration. This guy right here with a beautiful bowl cut is a colorblind artist. And so this little goofy camera that is connected to the top of his head for some reason transmits color into sound frequency. So he can hear what color sounds like. Mind-blowing stuff. So, with all of this stuff, a huge aspect in terms of reallocating sensory information in a new way, or spending time learning a new instrument, all of it requires an orientation towards a goal. And you have to grind at that goal for a long time. I'm sure a lot of us have heard, the 10,000 hour rule. That's not a specific number. You can't really quantify how much time, you know, Beethoven put into learning how to play instruments or write symphonies. He put in his life towards it. Like that violinist I talked about. He traded in a huge chunk of his life in order to allow his brain to mold itself to the task at hand. You can call that, you can say 10,000 hours, you can say a lifetime. Either way, it takes in a tremendous amount of energy to mold your brain towards something. So, medical school is a great example. These people are putting countless hours in order to achieve their goal and pass their tests. What we see is a change of gray matter in their brain. And you can see this change of gray matter with your naked eye using, obviously you can't just open up a medical student's skull and look at it, but using technology like an EEG, you can look inside and go, okay, this medical student put in a tremendous amount of effort into learning this stuff. Therefore, their brain changes and rewires itself and becomes stronger and better in order to incorporate that complicated information. And I thought this was a beautiful quote by David Eagleman. Using relevance as its North Star, the brain flexibly picks up on important details. Its billions of neurons serve as a colossal canvas for painting the world we happen to find ourselves in. And with it, we develop expertise in whatever has relevance to us. So the same thing happens in people with sensory organs that malfunction as it happens in, say, limbs. So this dog here learned to walk on its hind legs because it didn't have its other two legs. And this person here learned to shoot a bow and arrow with his feet and his neck, it looks like. So it's not like this guy could just pick that up and attach it to his neck and learn to shoot accurately. I'm sure the first million times he tried this, it didn't work out very well. I wouldn't want to be in the general vicinity while he was attempting to do that. And I'm sure this dog, I don't really want to think about it, but I'm sure this dog suffered for a long time attempting to move around before it mastered the ability to become bipedal. And so what we find is that your goal, the goal that you set, is an incredibly important aspect in terms of your ability to put the allotted amount of time that it would need to master whatever it is your endeavor is. That's just as important as your brain's ability to form to that goal. So it takes, like I said, countless hours in order for someone to achieve something like this. It takes countless hours for a dog to learn how to walk on its hind legs, and takes countless hours to become a master pianist. So if we go back to this, we can see the way in which orienting yourself towards a goal and trading your life in order to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve has a measurable impact on your neural anatomy. The hormones in your body change. The physical aspect of your brain that is devoted to that task changes. The connections that your neurons make change. The dendrites coming off of the axon change. Everything changes in order to allow you to choose the goal that you are attempting to achieve. So I'll leave you with that, and choose your goal wisely.